Working with effects allows you to add a lot of interesting elements to your sequence, but it can also take a toll on your editing system. Keep in mind, every time you play back an effect, something like a resize, a speed change, a chroma key effect, and so on, even though those effects are technically real-time, they are things that aren't actually present in the raw media. So Media Composer and your system are actually working hard to play those effects back in real time. Now, most of the time, it does an awesome job. But if you're playing back a lot of effects, then you may notice some signs of distress, like dropped frames. So in this movie, I'll do my best to clue you into some of the things that can stress out your system, as well as how to improve your performance without rendering. And in the next movie, we'll talk about exactly when you need to render and how to be smart about it. Before trying to solve performance issues, it's important that you understand how Media Composer retrieves the media from your drives. Now, Media Composer retrieves media from the drives very quickly, much faster than real time. When you press the play button, Avid loads the clip or sequence, finds the media, and quickly fills a video buffer. If you're on a good system or are playing just a few streams of video, the buffer stays full the entire time and playback is smooth. If you're on a slower system or are playing many streams of video, the buffer can't always stay totally full and playback can suffer. If you've played Netflix or YouTube videos or other internet-based video playback, you're probably familiar with the concept of a video buffer. In those cases, if your internet is spotty, then you're going to have problems on playback. Well, there's no internet in playing back media in Avid, but there are other factors that could cause spotty playback. We've already talked about one factor, the amount and the complexity of the effects that you have. But there are other things that can affect it. Your system's setup, including things like the speed of your processor, what type of graphics card you have, how much RAM you have, also what type and connection of hard drives you're working with, and whether you're playing back AMA-linked media versus transcoded or imported MXF media, as well as the resolution of your video, what video quality setting you're at, and what format your project is in. Now, some of these things are more easily controlled than others when you're trying to improve playback. While you may not have the money to go out and buy yourself a new computer or 8 more gigabytes of RAM, you do have the ability to alter a few other habits. We'll get into those in a second. Okay, so if circumstances are such that your buffer is only partially full, then it's still not going to drop frames, but Avid will give you a warning that you might drop frames soon. This is displayed as yellow or blue dashed lines which appear in the timecode track of your timeline. And if circumstances are such that your buffer empties completely, then it results in dropped frames, which are depicted as red warning bars in the timecode track. This simply means that you're not achieving real-time playback. Now let's come back into Media Composer and take a look at some of this. Just so you know, in order to stress the system as much as possible, I'm playing this sequence in the 1080p flavor here, and I've also got my video quality setting on full quality. All right, so keep that in mind as we play through this. So here we have a fairly complex sequence. We've got a stack of 10 video clips, each of them a picture-in-picture effect popping on one right after another here. And then they reach this point and they all fly away. In addition to each of these having a picture-in-picture, they've also got a color effect applied to it as well as a flop. So we are looking at 30 effects all stacked on top of one another as well as animation. And I'm going to play through this to see exactly what warnings we get and if we drop any frames. All right, so as we see here in the timecode track, I do have these red dashed lines and a couple of yellow ones as well. So those are my diagnostic bars that I was telling you about. Red, again, means that I was dropping frames. And then here's yellow, and this is a warning bar saying the buffer's not completely empty yet, but it's going to be empty soon. And yellow tells me that my processor is being taxed. If I had blue dashed lines, it would tell me that the source of stress is coming from my drives. So it's looking just that we're having some system issues here. Now keep in mind, these results do vary depending on what system you're on. So if you're following along, you may achieve completely different results. I'm on a very fast system with a great graphics card and lots of RAM. So it took all of this, 30 effects stacked on top of one another, to even make it hiccup. Like I said, most of the time, Media Composer is usually really efficient at playing back in real time. So let's take a look at a couple of options that can help you out. If you come to this menu here, I'll right-click and I have my video quality menu. And we've already touched on this, but I want to examine it in more detail. Now I have 3 options: full quality, draft quality, and best performance. In full quality, the frames are being sent through my system at full resolution. But at draft quality, they're only being sent through at a quarter resolution. Now, when you're dealing with editing in HD media, you really can't tell the difference, when you're just looking at it in your source and record monitors. So I highly recommend that you work in draft quality most of the time. Full quality should only be for screenings and output. Of course, I've had mine at full quality in recording this course so that everything looks as good as possible for you when you're watching it. But anyway, let's go ahead and switch this to draft quality and play through this again and see what we think. All right, you can see that there were no warning bars in the timecode track. I achieved real-time playback, no issue at all. If you take a look up here in the ruler, this was my last playback. Okay, so this was the most recent one, and this was the one right before that. So this is all of the trouble I had at full quality. Then I just dropped it to draft quality, no trouble at all. Now, if I need to, I can actually drop this down to best performance. And this is sending frames through your system at 1/16th resolution. Now, you'll definitely notice a degradation in quality here. But again, if real-time playback is the goal, sometimes a drop in quality is okay. Like if you're in the middle of designing a complicated effects composite and you just want to make sure that the composition and timing are working out, it may not matter that you can't see everything crystal clear. So again, if I play this back, it should play back at no problem at all. So that was just fine. And because these images are so small, you may not be able to tell that they're such poor quality. All right, I'm going to go back to full performance here, and I want to talk about my format. This menu here allows me to switch between the HD flavors and the SD flavor of my project. So everything's the same frame rate as you can see, but right now I'm in the 1080p flavor of my project. So if I'm at full quality, I could perhaps drop down to the 720p flavor or even the SD flavor, and it would play back just fine. Now keep in mind, I'm only talking playback here. There are a lot of other ramifications that switching your project format does for your editing experience, like determine the format and resolution of the media that you create. So just change this when it makes sense to change it, not when you're in the middle of creating a bunch of media. Okay, so let's try this. I'll drop to 720p and play this at full quality. And again, no issues, no dropped frames at all, okay? So in this case, just dropping my format down a little bit solved the issue. I'm going to go back to the 1080p flavor for right now to set me up for the next movie. And full quality. All right, so there are a couple of other settings and adjustments you can make, but these were the big ones. So it's just important that you're able to diagnose what is happening, when you're dropping frames, and then you can determine when you should adjust some settings. But when you need to take it to the next level and render your effects, you should learn to do it intelligently, and that's what we'll discuss in the next movie.